Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be doing a review of 3 books that I've read recently, and this is the first in a series of videos that I will be doing reviewing the Spiffbo 9 finalists. If there are any of you who follow me and are subscribed to my channel who are not aware of Spiffbo or SPFBO, it is a sort of like initiative led by the author Mark Lawrence called the Self-Published Fantasy Blog Off, where every year, obviously this being the 9th year, I'm not sure how many, I think it's 300 books are taken at the beginning of the year, all self-published fantasy, and they go through like a variety of stages through judges who read them, and eventually the stage that we're at now are the finalists, those that have been put forward by each judge team as their finalists, like their book that did the best in terms of rankings and ratings. So like I said, there are 10 of these finalists, and I am part of something called Mel's Takeover of Cassidy's version of judging SPFBO books. So this is something that Cassidy did last year, but Cassidy is an official judge this year, so she's not doing it, and instead Mel is doing it. So I'll of course have both Cassidy and Mel's channels linked in my description, but this is something that is a little bit different for me because I have not read a ton of self-published stuff overall. I've read a few, and it's been part of my goal to read more, and this is definitely like towards that goal for me. But this whole idea basically of us reading these as not official judges is to basically get some more exposure for these books, and that hopefully we will love them and talk about them more on our own channels, and these self-pub books will get more of the love they deserve and get more people reading them. So that's basically the entire idea. Just a quick rundown before we get into the actual reviews. But I've decided that from here on out, I'm going to be reading the books in order from longest to shortest, but I didn't do that right away. At first, I honestly just kind of picked the first couple of reads based on vibes, based on looking at the list and deciding what I was feeling at the time. So I will review these in the order that like I read them, and essentially, there is a little bit of a rubric here. So obviously my rating is still my rating. It's reflective of the score that I gave the book, but these books are being scored on characters, plot, world building, writing, and enjoyment, and all of those factors are out of 10, where a 10 would be like basically perfect, a 9 would be like that it was great, there's very little issues, an 8 would be that it was like very good, a 7 is I think a 7 is when it's like it's good, 75% good, still some like criticisms maybe. A 6 is it's okay, but it's still probably more good than bad. A 5 would be that it's meh, it's like 50-50 good and bad. A 4 would be if it's below par. A 3 would be like it needs significant work. Personally, I think it unlikely that I would be giving such low ratings to any of these books, but they are laid out there for us just because insofar as rating and reviewing is never objective, we are trying to lay out like an objective scoring system so you can categorize how you personally feel, and so that we as a group are kind of trying to be like consistent in how we're evaluating the book. So at least that's how I look at it. So with all of that introductory stuff out of the way, let's get into the 3 books that I read first for this project. So the first book that I read is Daughter of the Beast by E.C. Greaves, and this is sort of like Eastern Slavic, like Russian-inspired fantasy based on like what I understand from the folklore that's being used as the basis for this world. And in this book, we see our main character, Zintyl, who is essentially taken, and at the very beginning of the book, her village is attacked by these sort of like monstrous creatures, and they take her, and she's not really sure why or what their goal is, like why they have taken her instead of killing her. And we go on a long kind of journey with Zintyl And the Valkyrie, these creatures, they kind of raise her and they train her, and there is like a goal at the end of all of this, but it's sort of like it remains a mystery for much of the book, and they don't really tell Zintyle why or what purpose she is working towards. So that's kind of like the basic premise, and my overall score for this one ended up being a 6.1, which would be reflected in it being around 3 stars in the classic 5-star rating system. And honestly, this one was a little bit disappointing to me because when I saw that it was based on Slavic myth, based on how much I personally love the Winternight trilogy by Catherine Arden, I was hoping that it would give me some similar feelings to that, but it was very different from that, and maybe it is partially my fault for kind of having those false expectations going in. But in terms of how my scores break down, the first category is characters, so I gave this a 6 for characters. My issue kind of stemmed from the fact that I liked the characters, but to me they were sort of like archetypes or like cutouts of characters that could have been really interesting, but kind of ended up feeling mostly fine to me. And they weren't bad, but they were also like not characters that I was super invested in. The second category is plot, which I gave a 7 because I thought that the plot was pretty interesting. I didn't love the fact that things felt like they were kind of being kept from us falsely, but at the same time, I did like the idea of this coming of age story where like Zintyle kind of struggles with her identity because she is not the same race as these creatures who are raising her. She has some internal identity struggles. She kind of learns how to come into her own and how to be herself. Like, I enjoyed that journey, and I did like some of the things that were learned about like her and some of her friends, but I did feel like the reason I gave this a 7 and not higher is because I did feel at multiple points that we were a little bit directionless. Like, I have no complaints about the plot being a coming of age story, but I do need some kind of anchors or like things that we're moving towards, and I didn't feel that too much. The next category is world building, and I gave that a 6.5 star because I did think it was interesting, the sort of like magic that we explored and some of the cultures and different races that we saw and explored, but I also didn't feel super immersed. Like, I'm not a very visual reader, so I think that some of the world building that E.C. Greaves was trying to communicate to me was a little bit lost in translation. Like, I couldn't exactly picture these things, and so the 6.5 for me kind of reflects the fact that like a lot of these things were interesting to me on paper, but then they didn't like weave into the rest of the story in such a way that I really felt them. But I think that like, in a way, unfortunately, it kind of all comes down to the next category, which is writing. And so I gave the writing a 5, and it's not that I think that E.C. Greaves is a bad writer, but I've experienced this with some fantasy before, and it's not like a self-published fantasy problem. It's more of a style problem for me, where there are some styles of storytelling that are maybe more like direct and less stylized, that just don't really jive with me. I experienced this when I was trying to read John Gwynne, and I don't really know what it is where I just can't break down this wall between me and the story when it's delivered to me in a certain way. So unfortunately, the writing style of Daughter of the Beast was such that I never felt transported into the world. I never felt like, oh, that was such a beautiful turn of phrase. I could really feel that emotion that the character was feeling. And it wasn't like, it just wasn't hitting any deeper for me. And so that is just a little bit like sad, because I know that some people who like just get on better with this style of writing would definitely enjoy the book more than I enjoyed the book, but unfortunately, like the other aspects of it just weren't enough to carry it for me because they were weakened by like the vessel that they were delivered to me in, which was the writing. So I don't want to like feel like or sound like I'm criticizing too harshly, but it wasn't the writing style for me. So overall enjoyment, I gave the book a 6 because I think that it was just like, it wasn't bad. It was okay. I didn't dislike it. There were certainly like things that I disliked, but there were also things that I liked. And I do think that overall I can say that this book has its audience, and I just don't think that that audience is really me. Like the 6 rating reflecting that there is still more good than bad in there, and I still really like the mythology that was chosen to pull from. I find it very interesting that instead of using humans, there are multiple different races that none of them are human, although I really wish that was a little bit more clear and explored a little bit more, but that's okay. So this was my first book of the project, and obviously I was hoping for it to be something that I loved a little bit more, but that is definitely not to say that like if you, so the thing is, I don't think that this is like John Gwynne, but just to say, like, if you're somebody that likes John Gwynne's writing style, you might be somebody that meshes better with a book like this than me. So if you can find that comparison useful, that's the comparison that I'm going to make in that specific way. So if you think that this book sounds interesting, you should absolutely give it a shot, because I would really love for it to find like its niche and for the people who are meant to read it to know about it. So hopefully you are seeing this. The next book that I read was The Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan, and currently this is my favorite so far. So this book, the premise of this is, it's a little bit hard to sum up. I understand the relevance of what was written in the synopsis on Goodreads, but after having read it, I realized that I went into it still not quite knowing what to expect. And so the premise of this book, to not give too much away while still giving you an idea, is that we begin with what kind of appears to be like a little bit of a murder mystery, because we start in the perspective of this man who finds something interesting while he's walking home, and this artifact that he possesses, it winds up killing him, and this man is found dead in his home. But the fact that he possesses this artifact leads like authorities and investigators to believe that he was part of a very notorious group of people who are called the colonists. And they are a little bit of a mystery because the colonists were involved in a massacre of like a separate peoples. I forget how long ago it was, maybe like 15 years ago or something at this point. And they ever since have gone into hiding. They are believed to be some of the most like conniving, scheming, evil people in the entire land, and to be thought to be like one of them, or to think that this man who lived among this community could be a colonist after his death, is to people like just the absolute most horrific thing that you could find out about someone. And so you kind of start with this tone being set where it is a mystery, where you're kind of like, well, how did this man die, and what is actually behind this, and what is the truth? And our main character, Inkwell, kind of gets caught up in all of this because he is he's an orphan, and he has run away from an orphanage, and he makes his way on his own because he did not enjoy life in an orphanage. And he is around 15, and he is passing through this town when the whole like mysterious death goes down, because people are not sure whether this man just died or whether he was killed. There is something supernatural going on here. It's unclear quite what it is, but Inkwell gets kind of caught up into this whole like conspiracy and mystery, and I think that's probably all I will say, because I think that it's nice to go into this being able to uncover some of these things for yourself. So the categories, like I went through last time. For this, the first category, characters, I gave the book a 9 or a 4.5 star, if you will. And for this one, it's kind of hard to describe the reasons why, because talking about it is a little bit of a spoiler, but just know that I would say that the book, after a certain point, it opens up a little bit and it introduces you to more people than you initially had, like as Inkwell meets some people. And it's very found family-esque, and it's just something that I really was invested in and connected to, because Inkwell's kind of like a sarcastic teenager, but he uses humor and sarcasm and sort of pushes people away as a defense mechanism because of his life beforehand. And you get to see some kind of really heartfelt relationships form, but you also get to see some more difficult relationships where there are people that he headbutts with and doesn't really jive with and clashes with. And it's really just it's an interesting community of people that you get to end up seeing in this book. And I think that the way that Jacqueline Hagan built the characters was really skilled personally, because I found them to be quite distinct. And they really all did have personalities and motivations and histories of their own. So I thought that that was very well done. Next up, for the plot, I gave it an 8 or a 4 star. And the plot, once again, the plot is very difficult to get into at all, because I feel like this book gives you a setup, and then from there, it kind of lets you uncover everything. And so it's difficult to say, but even just by virtue of that, I've always really enjoyed a mystery. So part of that is me just thinking that this was a really solid, enjoyable plot, because there were consistently more things to learn. And we got some answers that kind of bring up even more questions when you get the answers to some of those questions. And continuing from there, it was always very interesting. There were goals that were being sought after, and goals that were, I shouldn't say goals, I should say questions about what certain characters' real goals or real motivations actually were, and questions about who you can trust. So I really enjoyed the plot. I thought it was really solid. Now, next up, world building. I also gave world building an 8. Upon reflection, it's a strong 8, because I really like a lot of what Jacqueline Hagan did with this world and magic system. It kind of strikes me as steampunk world building, but it's sort of light steampunk. It really doesn't feel like it's hitting you in the face too much with it. It's just that that's kind of the vibe of the level of technology that we're at, I would say. And I very much enjoy some of the history that has been brought about. I liked the world building, explaining how the lands were set up, and how there are, I forget what the actual physical orientation of it was, but let's just call it, there's the East and the West. And the race that lives in the West is sort of they're magic users. They used to have inter-clan wars and inter-family wars, and they were very fragmented and at each other's throats all the time. And when they finally made an effort to come together, there was this massacre that happened by this notorious group that I mentioned. But it does seem like something's not adding up about these events that happened, and it does seem like there's still some mystery around what actually happened, what the motivations were, what the actual situation was behind the scenes. And so I really enjoyed that history of this society, because you can understand why everything is so tense, why people feel the way that they do. And so I thought that that was well done. And there are still some mysteries in the magic, and there's some mysteries in the supernatural elements, and there are these sort of demonic creatures as well that are much to be explored in coming books. So this is the first in a series, and I do plan to continue in this one. I would really like to read more. Next up is writing, and I gave writing an 8.5 because this is one of those types of styles where I felt like Jacqueline Hagan just had a lot of personality to her writing, and she injected that personality into the characters that she was writing, and everything about it, everything just had an individuality to it, and it was fun to read, and it was easy to read, and just through what she was doing, I found it pretty easy to connect, and I was very engaged. And I can't emphasize enough how I was reading this pretty fast, like it was very easy to read, and that's always generally a mark that I'm enjoying a book. Like, I don't usually think about transparent prose, but I do think that this could be an example of it in terms of the fact that, like, when I'm thinking back now, I can't necessarily remember exactly how she was writing, just that it was a great way for me to experience the story and that I liked it. And then for enjoyment, I also gave this an 8.5. So that rounded out my entire score at an 8.4, which is basically a 4.25 stars. I know you can't give that on Goodreads, so I gave it a 4-star, and then I wrote down that I considered it a 4.25 star. It is a little bit unfortunate because, like, I would love to be able to contribute to like a more accurate rating on Goodreads for this self-pub book. But then I can't round a 4.25 up to a 5 either on Goodreads because that feels disingenuous to me. But suffice it to say, I thought that this was really, really fun. It was a really strong book. This to me feels like something that should get like way more attention. Like, I truly think that this deserves most people to give it a shot, just because I feel like if you like fantasy at all, there's maybe something in here that you can latch onto, that there's an element of it that you would like. And the third and final book that I read for this section of reviews was Master of the Void by Wend Raven. And so this is when I decided that I was going to start with the longest books first and work my way down. So Master of the Void is the longest of these books, but luckily and happily for me to say, I also really enjoyed this one, so I did not mind that it was a little bit longer. Master of the Void has a very interesting premise as well. So basically, at the beginning of the book, we are presented with our two main characters, Darius and Oremond, and the idea of this world is that there is basically magic is very prevalent. So not absolutely everyone is born with strong magic, but a significant amount of the population is born with magic strong enough that they can then be tested on their 13th birthday for it to be decided like what avenue or discipline of magic they possess strength in, and then they can go get a magical university education, and from there like go out into the world, live their adult lives. Like, this society is very much built on the fact that a certain magical education will gear you towards a certain career. Like, it's very much an established part of everything, and the magic system in this world is based on the stars. So it's based on like celestial power, star alignments, star orientations, the moment that you were born. So basically, when I said that you go get tested on your 13th birthday, you actually go get tested on the exact 13th moment of your birth. So when you are tested for magic, these stars would be in the exact alignment, like day, month, whatever time of day that they were when you were born. And that alignment helps to, I don't know exactly what it helps to do, but it seemed pretty cool. So our two main characters, Darius and Oremond, they're both around 12 years old when we first meet them, because when we first meet both of them, they are both at the stage of their lives where they are very much looking ahead to their 13th birthday very soon, where they come from very different walks of life. Oremond is from a very privileged family and Darius is not, but they both have spent like their entire childhoods studying leading up to this moment. Like, it's very, very important to them. So the situation like of each of the testings is a little bit different for each of these boys, but both of them end up testing for essentially no known magic. There are 6 possible disciplines of magic, and neither of them shows anything explicit from the testing. But with one of them, the person testing him does think that he may show some signs of magic, because it seems as though he had performed magic before to save miners from a mining accident. But this doesn't seem to add up because he didn't test for any of the disciplines. And both of these boys were born under the death of a star. And so it's unclear at first like what this means, but things start to unfold, and Ormond, the son of the privileged family, he basically has disappointed his father by not having magic, and so he ends up leaving home, and Darius, on the other hand, ends up being tutored by somebody who's trying to bring out his magic, but it turns out that they don't think that he is going to be able to live a normal life because of this strange power that he has. And Darius ends up kind of out on his own again, and Ormond also kind of ends up out on his own, and they take different paths, but I don't want to get into that. This is kind of just the setup of the book, but the underlying mystery throughout the book is that for some reason that is very unclear to everyone and makes it scary and tense, is that mind mages who can use powers of the mind are being abducted like all over this continent and all throughout the lands, and no one knows why, and no one really knows like how to stop the people that are committing the abductions, because nobody can seem to figure out who it is, and no one can figure out how they're killing people either, like guards, for example, guards that are guarding the mind mages that are like basically taken out of the way, but the mind mages aren't being killed, they're being taken. So there is that mysterious thread running throughout the book as well, and it goes from there. So the first category, characters, I gave Master of the Void an 8.5 for this, or like a 4.25, whatever you prefer. I thought that the characters were really strong. I did have some strengths and weaknesses that I thought for each character's journey, but at the same time, it was ironic because very early on in the book, I was really enjoying one character's development while not so much enjoying the other, and then ironically they kind of flipped at the same exact time where I wasn't enjoying the other's direction as much, but I was really enjoying the one that I wasn't previously as much. So it's kind of funny how that happened. I was never really not engaged because I always had somebody that I enjoyed following, and around Ormond, our one main character, we also follow his two brothers and one of his best friends from childhood, and then one of his brother's friends as well. So we did have like a few characters to latch onto, and they all had these kind of like, I think for the tone of the book, these pretty fun personalities. We also got to learn about some other characters from different cultures, and I thought that the way that that was approached was very interesting, and I really liked it. Sort of like differing worldviews and how each culture views magic and stuff like that. Obviously this spills over into world building as well, but just in terms of specifically those characters and how they acted, like I thought that for the most part it was really nice to see the relationships and bonds forming between people that were different from one another, and the development really felt like real relationships to me, so I enjoyed that quite a bit. And then next up we had plot, which I gave an 8. I think this was because, like, overall looking back at the cohesive whole, I really liked what the plot did, but there were points in the book where I felt like I didn't understand like why we were doing a certain thing, which isn't to say that later the reason wasn't revealed, but the pacing of just a few smaller parts was slightly weaker, where I thought that the plot like needed to get going a little bit more. But part of this was the fact that when you're following two people, sometimes it feels like if things are happening in one person's perspective and then not so much in the other person's perspective, the person who doesn't have as much happening, it feels even slower in comparison, if that makes sense. So overall though, still very solid. I very much enjoyed it. World building, I gave an 8.5 because once again, like I talked about, I did find the few cultures that we saw very interesting. I'm realizing that I always really like to see a pacifist culture. I've always found that approach very interesting, and so I really liked that we got to explore a culture that was like that, and they also were sort of like an island culture, and we got to see some of their traditions. And then there was everything with the magic and the celestials and the star-based magic system. I did find that very interesting. This felt like a very well thought out and fleshed out magic system. There were some cool things being done with it by the end of the book, stuff that like I never even imagined was possible at the beginning of the book, but I do feel like it was built up well throughout the book, where the information was, it didn't feel like it was ever really given to you in an info dumpy way. It was well built up. So the pacing was good in that regard. And yeah, I really enjoyed like everything that we learned about the world. Like it felt very internally consistent, which I appreciated. So yeah, it was really good. The writing I gave a 7.5 because I still felt like it was largely good. It did have some passages where I didn't connect with it. Like I thought that they could have maybe taken another pass over them because it felt a little bit out of place with the rest of the book. It was kind of strange, but overall, like, the writing style was solid. I really didn't have any complaints about it. Like, it wasn't the most stylistic prose, like it wasn't really anything like that, but the thing is, like, it was doing what it needed to do, and the other elements were strong and like had me enjoying them. And then speaking of enjoying it, for an enjoyment, I gave this an 8, which makes my overall score an 8.1, or like just over 4 stars. So I did really enjoy this. That's basically the takeaway. And like I said for the Wickwire watch, actually even more so for Master of the Void, I really do feel like there is something for everyone in this book, because like it even has the sprinklings of romance, and even though these characters are pretty young, like 15 to early 20s, I would say, for the most part. There are obviously characters that are older than that, but I think that it was nice to see characters who clearly truly cared about each other. Like, they weren't overly dramatic for the sake of it, even though they're young. They were quite emotionally intelligent, but they still felt fairly true to being young people. Maybe slightly mature for their age, but it's not exactly something I'm going to complain about when I'm enjoying how the characters interact with each other. But I just feel like this had some conflict. Well, of course it has conflict. I think what I mean to say is like head-to-head, like battle type of conflict. It had that. It had like interpersonal and internal conflict. It had the developed magic system. It had like really cool uses of said magic system. You have characters that are sort of like going on quests. You've got mysterious old man character who turns out to be someone. You have so many tropes well done, I think, in this book. So it was a very enjoyable read, and if the premise of this sounds interesting to you as well, I would absolutely recommend giving it a go. I'm really glad. It's unfortunate in this video, like of these 3, that I didn't enjoy Daughter of the Beast as much as I would have liked, but the Wickwire Watch and Master of the Void have been 2 really strong entries into this final crop of Spiffbo books, and I'm super glad that I read both of them. So I will see you next time I do this for the next 3 books that I read, but for now that is going to be it for this one. Please like this video if you liked it. Comment down below, let me know what you think of these books if you've read them, or if I have convinced you maybe that you should pick them up. That would be great to hear. As always, I will have my Discord and socials down in the description if you're interested in any of that stuff, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!